Prayers.
Let us pray. Guide us, Lord, in all our doings with your gracious favor. And further to your continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in you, we may glorify your holy name, and finally by your mercy attain everlasting life, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. We continue to pray for our nation during this hurricane season for protection against storms and hurricanes. Father, all the elements of nature obey your command. Calm the storms and hurricanes that may threaten us at this time, and turn our fear of your power into praise of your goodness. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, send forth, we beseech thee, upon thy servants who bear office in this country, the spirit of charity and justice, that they may in all things walk before you with steadfast purpose and a single heart, and faithfully serve in their several offices, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Most gracious God, author of all good things, we humbly beseech thee for the Parliament of Barbados, especially the Senate at this time assembled, that thou wouldest be pleased to direct and prosper all their counsels to the advancement of thy glory, the good of thy church, and the safety, honor, and welfare of our people. All this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ, our most blessed Lord and Savior. Amen. Amen. And together we say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forevermore. Amen.
The Senate is in session. Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We have been away from this chamber on break for a short time, but I think that all of us are aware that during that period, His Honor, the President, would have seen and lost a parent. He lost his father, and I would wish to move at this time that the Honourable the Senate stand for a moment of silence in recognition of the passing of our President's father a few weeks ago. Thank you. Colleagues, you may be seated.
Honourable Senators, the family and I thank you for your expressions of sympathy here today, but also for those of you who actually attended the funeral, those who called, sent cards, messages. We thank you for thinking of us at this time. Thank you very much. Honourable Senators, during our period of recess, we had the sad news of the passing of a former senator, Senator John Williams. He passed and was laid to rest whilst we were on our recess. Would you please join me for a moment of silence in honour of his memory? May he rest in peace. Thank you very much.
Messages from Her Excellency the President. Announcements by Your Honor.
By way of announcements, we have indications of absence from Senator Malulu, Senator Roberts Odell, Senator Nurse, and Senator Tate, and indications of lateness from Senator Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers.
Additional petitions. Presentation of papers.
If you could revert to announcements, minutes. You'll have some minutes for confirmation. We have our minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, August 2023 to be confirmed. August 16th, I'm sorry, 2023. Obviously not on my game today, to be confirmed. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that we do now confirm the minutes of the meeting of this Honourable Chamber held on Wednesday, August 16, 2023.
Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. Those minutes are so confirmed.
Presentation of papers.
Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have a number of documents to be laid. They are as follows. Loan agreement number IBRD 9469BB, Green and Resilient Recovery Development Policy Loan between the Government of Barbados and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, otherwise known as the World Bank. The Non-Reimbursement Investment Financing Agreement number GRT/ER 19884BA, Digital Transformation of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Thirdly, a mandatory agreement number 2 of loan contract number 4920/OCBA, Public Sector Modernization Program. The Barbados Economic and Social Reports for the years 2019, 2020, and 2021. The Land Tax Rate Order of 2023. The Land Valuation, Fresh Valuations Order of 2023, the Comprehensive Disaster Management Policy for Barbados of 2022, and finally, the Barbados Medium-Term Fiscal Framework for the periods 2024 to 2025 to 2026 and 2027.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to this business or sitting of the Senate and moved by the Minister.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 45-2 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Standing Order 45-2 is therefore suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
Introduction of bills.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that first reading speeches be undertaken for the following. I beg to move the first reading of a resolution in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting Act, Cap 225, to the leasing.
Only the bills.
Okay. To move the first reading of the National Payment System Amendment Bill 2023. To move the first reading also of the Barbados Water Authority Amendment Bill 2023.
There are two more. Two more. Four bills. Over page.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also beg to move the first reading speeches of the Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2023 and the first reading of Road Traffic Registration Fees Order of 2018, a validation bill for 2023.
The question is that those bills be read the first time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Those bills are accordingly read the first time.
Public business, sir.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 4, sir.
Order number 4.
Order number 4, which shall be signed to the Honourable Minister of Culture, Mr. Senator Sancho Moore, to move the second reading of the Barbados Water Authority Amendment Bill 2023.
Senator Dr. Monroe Knight.
Thank you, Mr. President, for acknowledging me as I stand to lead debate on this very important bill this morning. Mr. President, I don't think that there will be much contention on the notion that water is important for social well-being, for economic development. I think that there's fundamental agreement that water is critical on a number of different levels. In fact, some would suggest that water is part of what we would call the global commons, Mr. President. Essentially, that it forms part of the obligation that a state would have for its citizens in order to ensure that it meets the fundamental needs of those citizens that it has a duty of care towards. This is also as well reiterated in the Sustainable Development Goals. It is part of the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 6 speaks to clean water and sanitation. Specifically, it asks that states seek to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, including the protection and restoration of water-related ecosystems. Mr. President, the importance of this particular SDG, SDG 6, is all the more crucial given the impact of climate change, Mr. President. Given the impact, the urgency, and the ongoing threat of climate change, water, how we protect it, how we use it, how we conserve it, is now part of the mission critical that certainly Barbados and countries like ours have to ensure that we take up and address, Mr. President. But it is climate change and the vagaries of climate change. But there are also as well issues of population growth and what that will mean in terms of consumption patterns. We have a situation, Mr. President, in Barbados, that although we have a characteristic of a declining population, the statistics would suggest that our water consumption is actually increasing. So that population and what happens with the population, how we consume, is also one of the considerations when we look at the issue of water and, again, how we are able to effectively manage it. One of the big impacts, Mr. President, of climate change, and it's particularly in relation to water, is that of drought. And I believe that we would recall just a few months ago, the Barbados Water Authority actually had to issue prohibition measures in order to encourage conservation amongst the population so that we can sustain our water levels properly and make sure that we will have enough to fulfill all of those needs in relation to social well-being and economic development, Mr. President, as I would have alluded to before. Mr. President, the scientists are suggesting that drought, and what they are calling, Mr. President, I was not even aware of it, mega drought, drought and mega drought, are estimated to get more intensive. And as well, that from 2030, we can see the incidence of mega drought moving from 12% to 60%. And for those of us who would think that 2030 is, it's only 7 years, Mr. President. And if you look at how fast time is going, that's just around the corner for us and for the globe, Mr. President. And again, there are some of us who would suggest that these things, and when we talk about them, seems like, so far, and things that could not happen in Barbados. And again, in particular for water, we have a particular culture about water. We have become accustomed to, for the most part, being able to turn on our taps and get our water flowing through. Mr. President, if the water doesn't come on when we turn on that tap, schools close, businesses close, and it becomes a major disruption. But scientists are saying we could face mega drought, periods of as much as 10 years where we can experience that straight periods of droughts, Mr. President, are now going to be part of our reality. And I would hope that what this period has taught us in terms of our experiences with climate change, the adverse weather patterns, is that things that we thought couldn't happen, we're actually seeing them come to fruition. So all I'm saying, Mr. President, is that again, the urgency about how we treat to water, manage, conserve, becomes critical in our present context. And importantly as well, Mr. President, if we look at the profile of our country, Barbados, when it comes to water resources, we would note too as well that unlike other Caribbean territories that have streams and rivers, Barbados doesn't have any of those. You look around, no, that's not our profile. So that, again, the estimates suggest that 90%, Mr. President, 90% of our water resources comes from underground extraction. We have to extract it and pump it in order to then to be able to have access to our water. And that is extremely important as well. So that we have climate change, we have population, but then we have our own natural context here in Barbados in relation to our water profile. A 2014 study that was done by Adrian Cashman at CERMES, looking at the issue of water security in the region, and CERMES is the Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies, suggests that Barbados, so this study was published in 2014, Mr. President, in 2014, and he suggested at the time that Barbados was already using near 100% of its available supply, of its available water supply in 2014. And that's a sobering statistic, that in 2014, we were already at the point of using almost 100% of our available supply, Mr. President. So we have a challenge. We have a challenge before us. It's a global challenge, but it is an acute national challenge as well. And so that we have to look at this issue, Mr. President, very seriously. I called it a mission critical issue that requires what I will suggest is a multi-pillar approach. We have to do a number of things. There will never be just one single piece of legislation or policy or program, but it requires layers of actions that need to be undertaken for us to be able to address the effective management, the conservation, address infrastructure challenges, Mr. President, requiring, again, like I said, that multi-pillar approach. And the government has been attempting to do that significantly through various policies and programs. You would note that in 2000, we would have had our first desalination plant, Mr. President. We would have passed here in this chamber as well the Water Reuse Act. In 2022, there was a water and land use zoning policy as well, Mr. President. We looked at developing stormwater management and flood alleviation policies, ecosystem and nearshore water management as well. We are currently also undertaking a strategic mains replacement program. So a number of different programs, policies, and legislation the government has been putting in place in order to address this critical mission challenge that we have before us. And so that the amendment before us, Mr. President, is also part of that multi-pillar approach in order to be able to make sure that we can secure that critical commons that as a state we are obliged to provide for our citizens. Safe and clean drinking water, an adequate supply, Mr. President. So that this amendment, the amendment bill before us, including the order, Mr. President, is intended to address some of these critical aspects that we need to make sure, like I said before, that we can continue to have a sufficient supply of water. The amendments attempt to do three things. One, to ensure that we can increase the efficiency and the management and control systems within the Barbados Water Authority. Two, to ensure the continued viability and safety of our groundwater systems. And thirdly, as well, to ensure that we have an up-to-date, modern legislative framework that allows us to respond not only to today's challenges as well, but also as well to coming and future challenges that respond, Mr. President, as I said, to all of the intertwined and interconnected circumstances that we would have to face. Again, population changes as well, climate change, and our own specific circumstance. So when we look at this amendment bill, you will see that it intends to build on what we would have had in place before, modernize some of the legislation that has informed how we are treating to water. Mr. President, unbelievably, dates back to 1953. As much as 1953. Yeah? And that says something in terms of how we are seeking to make sure that we again bring up to date this legislation. Our water zoning policy that we all grew up and knowing about Zone 1 was influenced by a 1963 study. This amendment bill amends legislation that was enacted in 1980. So again, the attempt is to ensure that we, as much as possible, have a comprehensive piece of legislation. Now, Mr. President, the whole of government has embarked on what we call, and if you talk to any senior public officer, they will tell you, as soon as they ask you, what are we doing in terms of public sector transformation, deconstruction, and reconstruction. And what that simply means, Mr. President, is that we're seeking to unpack within government all of the processes that inform the way that we do our work, to make sure that we look and see what is it that we need to improve on, ensure that we imbue greater efficiency within the process. What is not working? And sometimes we think that something might be working, in working as well as it should. So that notion of deconstruction and reconstruction throughout the entire public service will allow us to transform and to modernize. And part of that notion of deconstruction and reconstruction is very much also looking at the institutions, looking at the institutional framework of how our agencies and ministries are also led. And when we look at the Barbados Water Authority, it means taking a look at the leadership structure, the management structure of the Barbados Water Authority, and asking quite critically, is it right-sized? Is it fit for purpose? So all of the things, Mr. President, I would have said before, with an act that established in 1980 for the Barbados Water Authority to be managed by a general manager, we then have to ask ourselves, is that again still relevant in the context of what we are asking the Barbados Water Authority to be able to manage and undertake now? The board of the Barbados Water Authority has made a recommendation that is reflected here in this amendment for us to move to a CEO, a Chief Executive Officer, to manage the operations of the Barbados Water Authority. And that recommendation is made, Mr. President, with the understanding that we now have a Barbados Water Authority that is called upon to deal, as I said, with the issues of climate change. But there are new technologies as well, Mr. President, that didn't exist before. We're now looking at robotics. I remember, and I think the leader of government business, Senator Cummins, was there as well when we had a presentation by a firm that was telling us that they could send these little robot things down through the mains that then could, provide information on the leaks and all of these things, technology that didn't exist before. So that we have an expanded scope of work for a Barbados Water Authority, again, that has to address one, long-standing problems, because we're still at 2023 dealing with long-standing issues of oil mains dating back, I believe, to the 1860s, but as well having to modernize and having to make sure that we deal with that mission-critical challenge. And therefore, the amendments suggest that we look at further that institutional strengthening by having this post of Chief Executive Officer. I also want to note as well, Mr. President, that the board also agreed to the creation of the post of Chief Operations Officer and the Chief Technical Officer, which have been approved by Cabinet as well. So that in the legislation, we would note, Mr. President, that we have that the former Section 9 of CAP 274, which was the principal legislation, is therefore deleted and substituted with a new section to provide for changes to the management structure. So that new section will provide, again, for the Chief Executive Officer. And like I said, Cabinet has then also approved for further support of the CEO in these two additional posts, the post of the Chief Operations Officer and as well as the Chief Technical Officer, with the intent to make sure that we have now, again, layers of support. Because before, when you looked at the structure, and everything was going to the general manager. Everything going to the general manager with no layer in between at the operational level. So we are now creating a structure that will then provide the support that is needed and then allow the CEO to operate then at the high level under the direction of the board as well. Making sure then that the Barbados Water Authority can be more responsive and flexible and respond as well substantially to stakeholder needs, and also as well manage the heavy need in order to make sure that the Barbados Water Authority is also financially right-sized. Because, Mr. President, it needs to be financially right-sized. And that is something that we have realized. The Barbados Water Authority has been undertaking a number of initiatives right now as we speak in order to be able to right-size the organization and improve its efficiency in the way that it works, including, Mr. President, looking for alternative sources of financing to fund some of the major infrastructure work that needs to be done, as I talked about, in terms of mains repairs and all of those things. We have had, under the Barbados Water Authority, a $40 million grant from the Green Climate Fund for what we commonly call the 3R Cruise program, a program to reduce, reuse, and recycle to ensure water resource management. And a large part of that program includes education and public awareness. But we also have the Water Sector Resilience Nexus for Sustainability for Barbados as well, which is intended to build greater resilience to extreme storm events and drought conditions. The procurement of over 1,500 gallons of, I should put on my glasses, I can read. five water tankers and over 5,000 gallons and tractor units so that we can make sure that we increase the abstraction of water as well. We have a personal tank program, installation of 200 rainwater harvesting systems, and a whole slew of things in order, again, to be able to meet the demand. But if we are going after resources, then those projects then need to be managed effectively. Somebody has to be there in order to ensure implementation and to monitor. And before, all of that, again, landed with one person. And so some of us would ask, but is that so fundamental in terms of all of the challenges that we are facing with water? Why would we then have an amendment at this level that speaks, just to the leadership? But if we understand that in order to ensure effective delivery, that we then have to make sure that we have effective management. That same 2014 study, Mr. President, that I alluded to by Cashman, he also looked at the effective management, the institutional management systems that existed in terms of looking at how countries that were part of the study were being able to manage their water resources. And basically that study said that those management systems were suboptimal, subpar, right? And that effectively they were therefore imperiling the effective delivery of the supply. So a clear nexus between making sure that we have effective management and therefore effective delivery. And that is why, Mr. President, we have taken the time to have this particular amendment that deals with leadership of the institution and making sure then that it is effective so that we deal with that pillar at the institutional level of making it fit for purpose and right-sized, Mr. President, as we attempt to address this mission critical issue. So that this is one aspect of the amendment that we will have, that we will see, as I said before, that former section 9 now being deleted and substituted with this new section to give effect to that CEO there. Mr. President, one of the other amendments that is also very important has to do with the management of abstraction wells. And again, multi-pillar approach. So we've looked at structure, institutional framework, right-sizing it, but then now at the very practical level, the amendment also speaks to how we treat two abstraction wells. And again, why is that important? If you remember, I started out by talking about the fact that we have to abstract our water from underground. Yeah? Because again, we do not have access to the springs and the other freshwater elements like other countries. So being able to make sure that we are able to monitor what is abstracted from wells, private abstraction wells, is extremely important. Because we then have to be able to make sure that we juxtapose that abstraction against other things that we have to be able to do to support, whether that is in the construction sector, the agricultural sector, citizens' demand and consumption. And the only way to do that again is by ensuring that we have an effective management of the system. Mr. President, the management, or like I said, the frame that gave oversight to this, actually, as I said before, came from a 1953 Underground Water Control Act. That is what was governing our system of management from 1953. And under that previous act, it gave power to a water board. And again, if we are looking at integrated water management, if we are looking to improve efficiency, if we are looking to make sure that we're able to monitor, given the challenge, that also as well then has to be improved institutionally as well. And I hope, Mr. President, I've made the case earlier in the conversation of the importance of conserving our water resources and making sure that we have a good process in place for monitoring. So that we need to improve the regime that we have. And from a national perspective as well, ensure that we are not over-pumping. Because, Mr. President, I understand that there are about 78 private abstraction wells. And of those 78, Mr. President, 56 are private, 58, are private, and the others are divided among various government agencies, but also 81% of the abstraction currently happens for irrigation. And again, that need to balance what is happening within that regime against other national needs. So what the amendment, Mr. President, so 78 abstraction and 56 of those are privately owned, with the remainder allocated to the Barbados Agriculture Development and Marketing Corporation, the Barbados Agriculture Management Company, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, the National Conservation Commission, and the allowance for the average water usage range from 9,000 to 2 million gallons per day. And like I said, with 81% of those wells being used for irrigation purposes. So this amendment introduces a new section, Part 4A. So rather now than have that 1953 Act, what we are doing within this amendment is bringing within the bill the control and management of the wells. So again, that we have a comprehensive piece of legislation that addresses that management as well. And previously, as I said, that 1953 legislation would have given control to what was called a water board at that particular time. This amendment suggests the establishment not of a board, Mr. President, but of a committee that will, I would say, make sure that we have that integrated approach that is necessary to bring to bear all of the ministries and skills that are needed in terms of how we manage our wells, our abstraction wells. And that is, Mr. President, a Water and Wells Management Committee is what we will have. And that section comprises the sections 18A to 18G, and therefore then proposes that the committee then be comprised, Mr. President, of the following: the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Transport, Water and Water Resources, or his nominee; the Chief Executive Officer, as we are suggesting, again because of the amendment, of the Barbados Water— the Director of the Environmental Department, or his nominee; The permanent secretary and the Minister of Agriculture are his nominee. The chief medical officer are his nominee. The permanent secretary and Minister of Environment and National Beautification are his nominee. And the chief executive officer of the Barbados Agriculture Development Marketing Corporation are his nominee. So, Mr. President, what we are seeing, if you look at the membership now of this committee, we have agriculture, we have environment, we have water there as well, and representation then, as health as well, Mr. President, health as well is in there. And not only at the level of the permanent secretaries, but the level of directors, heads of agencies as well, people who do the day-to-day work of this now being included in this committee, making sure that, again, that we fundamentally address the interlinkages in terms of water resource management, Mr. President. Section B of the amendment therefore provides for the roles, responsibilities of the Barbados Water Authority in relation to these abstraction wells, and gives the Barbados Water Authority and its employees the ability to manage and perform a number of acts in relation to wells. They can go in, they can investigate, be able to alter, to look and see what is happening with abstraction. They can issue an order, Mr. President, in the context of the issuing of licenses. If we go and we see somebody is over pumping, it can issue an order for them to stop. Fines as well can be applied. I also want to note, Mr. President, that before, under the Water Board, it was the board that managed the licenses and the applications. This amendment now, the applications will go to the minister, and I know that we are always very sensitive in terms of applications going to the minister. But if you look, Mr. President, at the amendment specifically says when the application goes to the minister then sends it to the committee for their recommendation. And she acts under the recommendation of the committee in respect of that application for a license, and in respect for actions to be able to be undertaken as well. But, Mr. President, the Barbados Water Authority, even though it's not in this amendment, I do want to say as well, is going further, because I know that some people would say that is fine that we have a regime for those abstraction wells, but there's also further concern in terms of what it is that we are doing with our wells. We have a number of abandoned wells, Mr. President, unused wells. And the other place I noted as well, it was reported that we've had even some deaths where people have fallen into wells. Mr. President, we know that as an occurrence that can happen. And so the Barbados Water Authority is putting plans in place in order then to be able to identify where all of the wells are on the island. And it is asking citizens to be able to report where those wells are, to help the Barbados Water Authority to have a clear plan of identifying where those wells are, and then how we can then ensure better management of the wells throughout the island, Mr. President. So again, I go back to that multi-pillar approach that we are having, looking at a framework that addresses the institutional deficits within the institutions that are tasked to manage it, modernizing the legislation as well, and then creating a framework by which we can bring together, as I said before, all of the agencies that are necessary in order for us to be able to better manage our water resources, Mr. President. And I think that this regime will allow us as well to better able to monitor again by having clear fines imposed for misuse of wells, Mr. President, which is extremely important, so that again, under this amendment, the minister, on the recommendation of the committee, can give notice to an owner or occupier, again, that well must be plugged or filled. And again, that expense then will be at the owner of the particular well, which is again very important in terms of us being able to manage our wells and what it is that we are doing as well. Mr. President, well, the first two amendments dealt specifically with improvements to the management and again the licensing regime for wells, making sure that we have an integrated process. The final and perhaps major amendment to this bill has to do with water zoning. And, you know, I was recalling, Mr. President, you know, as a young girl growing up, not understanding much, but I think we all grew up with this notion of Zone 1 in our heads. It got more than Zone 1, but for some reason, Zone 1 was always the one that stuck out, yeah? And again, because we've had a number of instances where there have been some tensions between citizens who would seek, Mr. President, to set up residences, dwellings within those areas, and how the state then has to be able to mediate that need from citizens as well, with being able to protect and adhere to that policy in relation to Zone 1 and protect our groundwater systems as well. So we have a knowledge of that water zoning policy and its need to have that water zoning policy in order then to be able to protect the system. But Mr. President, again, that water zoning policy arose from a 1963 study. 1963. 1963. A 1963 study, Mr. President, governs our current land zoning policy. It's called the National Groundwater Protection and Zoning Policy, and came from a 1963 study. It's called a Tallstrom study, which was commissioned by the government to look at what was happening with our water systems, to be able to look at where the water was going, what was happening to it. But Mr. President, if we take a step back and we look at what was happening within the country, and then why we would need to make sure that we have that water zoning policy, we would know, Mr. President, that in the immediate post-emancipation period and pre-independence period, disenfranchised people moved where they could in order then to be able to establish themselves, have houses, Mr. President, and be able to alleviate their conditions. We have the Moyne Commission report of 1945 as well, who speaks to the dire conditions that people face. At that time, there was no thought to rules and the regulations of where you should have a house and how it should be put up, and even what would be the impact, Mr. President, on that scarce, on that critical groundwater, those critical groundwater resources. So that study in 1963 sought then to be able to bring some regulation to that, and sought then to ensure that we would have a protective framework for the provision of clean water to citizens. And based on that study in 1963, then we had the establishment, like I said, of our current water zoning policy, which was never legislated. So again, this amendment today is critical because it seeks now to legislate the water zoning policy that had previously then been implemented under the town and country planning. And it then gives the purview for water zoning now to the Barbados Water Authority. So critical, Mr. President, again, in terms of the amendment and what it is that we are doing today, modernizing legislation and creating the appropriate framework for it. Mr. President, the water zoning policy, I think that we all agree, was a far-reaching policy. It was not supported by legislation, and it has served us well. It has served us well. I think Barbados' water quality, Mr. President, meets international standard. I don't recall that we've had in any recent times, Mr. President, concerns in relation to threats to water and the quality of the water that citizens take. And that again is in large measure to part of this 1963 policy that was established. But 1963, the far cry from where we are now. The only amendment to that policy happened in 1972. The only amendment to that 1963 frame, Mr. President, happened in 1972. And that was essentially to grandfather, or we would say protect those that had had structures before 1963 when that policy came into being, so that we could not disenfranchise those persons that would have established. So 1963, one amendment in 1972. But our context has changed significantly. Again, in 1963, we would not have been thinking about desalination, about the threat of climate change, about technology. We now have far more advanced technology, Mr. President, that will allow for us to be able to do greater detection, Mr. President. We now have land use policies as well, Mr. President, that has allowed us then to be able to move the process forward. And therefore, there was a need to relook that initial frame that was established in 1963. And in 2006, I think the first study rather was in 2002, we had a study again that was conducted to look at what was happening again in terms of our water zone and our land, our policies. And it determined that while the 1963 policy was a good frame, it was, however, outdated. It was outdated and did not take into consideration new concerns that would need to be brought to bear in terms of how we treated to our zoning policy, Mr. President, and we are here today. And Mr. President, to be very honest, all the evidence would suggest that this is now not a new revelation, that there have been prior recommendations in relation to this, but they have not been taken up, and we are here today, Mr. President, within this amendment, in order then to be ensure that we, again, have a legislative framework that certainly modernizes the process, Mr. President. And those recommendations from that study and the changes that you would see now that are specified within this amendment, there's a number of different things. One, it moves the zones from moving from a numerical delineation of the zones from zones 1 to 5 now to a alphabetical delineation. So we have zones A to F. Secondly, it introduces a new zone, which is a desalination zone. Again, like I said, at that time, we would not have been thinking about desalination. But now, because we have desalination, we are now introducing a desalination zone. And thirdly, and more fundamentally, it limits the zone 1 area as well, makes it smaller, Mr. President. Again, because of new information and data in relation to that management, Mr. President. So that we have, Mr. President, and I'll go through again, I'll go through the zones. We have a zone A, which is an exclusion zone area, which restricts controls where strict controls are necessary to protect the quality of the groundwater supply due to the rapid 90-day travel time for microorganisms, pollutants, and other contaminants to seep through the area. Now, and this is also significant because that 1963 study had done the zone 1 area based on a notion that not 90 days, but rather it would take, I believe, some 300 days. So the previous zone 1 catered for most bacteria and viruses today within 300 days. But now we know that they will die within 90 days as well. So new information, new evidence, new science then creating a better and improved regime. Zone B is a pathogen management zone area, where strict controls are necessary to enhance the protection of areas due to the 91 to 300 day travel time. We have Zone C, which is a chemical management zone area where strict controls are necessary due to the 301 to 730 day travel time. Zone D is an aquifer recharge contributing area where the replenishment of aquifers occurs. And we have the use of suck wells as a primary means of treatment of sewage and wastewater will be prohibited in Zone D from January 1st, 2029. January 1st, 2029. And this is important again. When Hallstrom had done that study in 1963, one of the findings one of the major concerns that arose from that study was that there was a potential danger in bacteria seeping through because of the prevalent use of soakaways and suck wells, Mr. President. And what we are doing in this amendment is to be able to recognize and to be fair that there will be a need for a transition as we ask people to move away from those use of soakaways to septic tanks. So we're given a transition period, Mr. President, from January 1st, 2029. And the government is looking to put in place some mechanisms to assist householders as they make that transition. But it is an important transition, Mr. President, again, to ensure the protection of our water resources. And like I said, the government will be putting in place mechanisms, one, for education, and also as well to assist householders as they try to, as they make that transition as well. Zone E is a non-recharge contributing area which does not recharge or replenish the aquifer, and where such a zone exists, there shall be no specific restrictions unless such restrictions are imposed under the Scotland District Authority Act. And Zone F, as I said, new zone, is a desalination zone which covers the area surrounding a well field used to produce brackish or seawater feed water for the process of desalination, where strict controls are necessary within a 90-day travel time, Mr. President. So the introduction of a new regime. Mr. President, mission critical. Mission critical. We are now, Mr. President, as I understand it, with our current population, I believe we have a consumption of over 33 million imperial gallons, they tell me, a day of water. In a country where in 2014 it was estimated that we were already using 100% of our available resources. The mission critical challenge before us, again, is to make sure that we can have the necessary legislative framework, policies, and programs in place. But, Mr. President, we can't do it in one shot. I've spoken, Mr. President, to the number of programs and other legislation that the government has implemented prior, and that these amendments today are also part of that critical pillar that is necessary for us to be able to address these concerns. One, at the institutional level, in terms of the leadership and management of the Barbados Water Authority. Two, in terms of how we manage our abstraction wells, which is critical to delivery of water. And then thirdly, a new regime for zoning, which moves the country forward in recognition of where we are and where we will be going. With these few words, Mr. President, I commend this bill. With these few words, Mr. President, I commend this bill. I am obliged, Mr. President, and I do beg that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Monroe Knight. Minister Dr. Bradford.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I wish to preface my remarks by expressing my sympathy and condolences for your recent personal loss.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I rise in support of the efforts that are being made to ensure the availability of water for industrial, domestic, agricultural, and other uses in our country. I believe that the steps that are being taken are steps in the right direction. And I think we're at a stage in our development where, in fact, we need to pursue a more inclusive and strategic approach in with respect to the management of water, the critical resource for the 21st century. Some time ago, I raised the issue of Barbados being a water-scarce country. And I felt that we are water scarce according to the United Nations criteria, but that in reality, in a country where you capture only 10% of the water that falls from heaven, you're probably not water scarce, my own opinion. In that context, which has been confirmed by other observers in terms of the amount of water that we capture, not talking about what falls, but what we capture for domestic, industrial, and agricultural uses. If the data suggests that we only capture 10%, then clearly, in my estimation, we're not water scarce. In addition, of course, Mr. President, we are aware that it's not only the capture and distribution of water, but also the amount of leakage that takes place from old pipes that were probably established during the colonial period. Some of them over 100 years old that need to be replaced. And the efforts that government is making to replace these leaking pipes and to update and modernize the infrastructure is commendable. It is important. And I believe, again, that the government is moving in the right direction. Efforts to modernize the Water Authority and to give it priority in terms of financial allocation is also important. But I think, Mr. President, the time has come for greater individual responsibility and citizenship participation in the management of water in our country. Our country, in my opinion, must now make an effort to ensure that our people and that every citizen of this country is sensitized to the importance of careful water management. There should be more individual action. There should be more water harvesting. Water should not be taken for granted. We should ensure that water is conserved. The agricultural sector must be given priority in the distribution of water to support food security. No matter what kind of agriculture we engage in our country, water will be necessary. Water is an essential ingredient for agricultural development. I'm of the view that the agricultural sector should be provided with water at subsidized rates, because we're not only attacking the problem of water distribution and water use, we're attacking a fundamental weakness in our country, which is food insecurity. And food insecurity is one of the challenges of our time. In a country in which 1 in every 3 children is overweight, where 80% of deaths are caused by non-communicable diseases, where high incidence of diabetes, hypertension, cancer, and obesity are rampant, and where the evidence suggests that poor nutrition is a contributing factor to these challenges, where the bill for health is exploding, then the agricultural sector has a critical role to play in helping us to deal with the challenges of health. And where health is the concern of every citizen of this country, and where the tsunami of non-communicable diseases must be arrested if we're going to have a productive population going forward, then it is critically important that the agricultural sector is given priority in water distribution and in the allocation of appropriate financial resources. You cannot, Mr. President, have an agricultural sector producing less than 20% of the food needs of your country and believe that you're going to deal with the problems of chronic non-communicable diseases, which clearly, from all the evidence presented, is related to poor food choices, poor consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables, lack of exercise in some cases, but particularly the agricultural sector has a strategic role to play in helping us to deal with the challenges of health. And therefore, in my view, as we talk about water, water for agriculture should be a priority in our country. And so subsidy for water in agriculture, in my view, can help to reduce the healthcare bill. Personal responsibility is crucial. We must take charge of the management of water resources at the individual level. Simple things like turning off the taps when not in use, fixing water leaks, using water-efficient appliances. And, Mr. President, educational programs on the importance of water conservation as it relates to climate change must be an essential part of education. Educating our people on the importance of conserving water now becomes a critical element of our educational endeavors. The restrictions which are normally adopted when we have drought conditions must be looked at critically and determine whether some of these should not be maintained over a longer period of time in order to ensure that the country has a supply of water that can support industrial, agricultural, and domestic use. I believe we cannot afford to waste this vital resource, nor can we afford to waste the moment to emphasize to our population that water is a vital resource that must not be taken for granted, and that each citizen and each individual in this country has a responsibility to ensure that the water resources of our country are managed sustainably. In that regard, I congratulate the government for the initiatives that are being taken to modernize the Water Authority and to provide it with the appropriate resources to ensure that our country can move forward with the appropriate resources for its development. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Bradford. Speakers? Senator Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm not going to button my jacket because I want my pink shirt to be seen. Because in support of all those ladies, sir, who are afflicted by, this is breast cancer month, Senator Cummins. It is pink, it's a light pink, thank you. And I will wish, sir, that it should all be treated with a certain degree of urgency, and that's all I will say. Mr. President, Barbados is listed quite high on the list of water scarce countries. And our position today has not changed a lot, and it was a predictable outcome because we all knew that with development, there's increased demand and need for water. And on our current expected trajectory, sir, the needs will become worse. There was once, sir, and I might have said this in this honorable chamber before, a prominent former permanent secretary was asked by Prime Minister what he thought, at the time, sir, he was the chief town planner, what he thought was the biggest hindrance to development in the country. And the common answer was money. And he respectfully told the Prime Minister, sir, it is water. Without water, we cannot go anywhere. And he was absolutely right. Sir, we have struggled for a long time with this problem. So I congratulate the government on bringing to this chamber a bill which should, sir, help with the problem and clarify some of the issues with water rights in this country. Sir, with my one, I see it largely as a water rights bill. Sir, every member of each chamber should have a vested interest, sir, in this bill. Every citizen should have a vested interest in this bill. Because without water, sir, we will not exist. I'm a little bit surprised by your pleadings for a speaker, sir. I thought everybody would have their hands up. Enough said. Sir, I'm told that we pump 99% of our available water. We are in 2023. There was a study, sir, done in 1946, to which the Honourable Minister referred in the other place. A study by Alfred Sand. Sir, some time ago, I stood in this chamber and I made a document in the House. It's available for everyone to see. And the blind nowadays can read Braille. So all the information that was available then, sir, in the biggest geological survey done on Barbados with regard to water is still available. Some of the questions being posed, sir, are answered within this document, and I will come to some of them. Now, it is recommended, sir, that we should not be pumping more than 92% of available water, but we pump 99%. So it tells us where we are at. We in Senator Monroe, like I said, is mission critical. It's far beyond that. We are on the edge. We are on the edge, sir. And while desalination, sir, to provide additional water is available, it comes at a great cost. We know that 75% of the cost of our water delivered to our customers, sir, is energy. Sir, Mr. President, when we look at some of the persons who have invested in water, they have clearly worked out how to provide energy in a green environment and how to increase the profit from the operations. I would like to believe, sir, that what government has done at Bomiston will be seen, sir, in all the areas where we pump water, and that the cost to the consumer, sir, should over time come down. That is probably unlikely. Mr. President, I'm told that 40+% of the water pump is what is called, a colleague of mine who is an economist told me is called non-revenue water. Mr. President, that is not sustainable. If you were baking bread and selling from your shop in a bakery, and 40% of all the bread you bake had to be dumped, you couldn't survive. The business would have to close, you would declare bankruptcy, and you have tremendous debt. But what it fundamentally means is, sir, you're wasting people's money. Because if you produce something and you lose 40% before you deliver it, it means that something is wrong. Imagine if every day a security company collected your money from your business, and when they delivered it to the place where they couldn't account for 40%. You feel something is seriously wrong, and you'll try to fix it. But the fixing can't just be replacing pipes. The fixing has to involve, sir, all the little leaks that run for 40 days. All the things that are called in and nobody responds. Sir, I happen to be fortunate enough to have a hydrant right in front of my house. I hope I never need it. And it leaked for 3 months. And one day I called Freddie. I don't remember how many times. And I was told I would have to come and report it. And the only way I got a response was when they said, the photographer from the nation is already here. And you just told me your name, so we have an article on Sunday in the paper about this, and it will get fixed. And 10 people turn up on the truck to fix one hydrant. It suddenly became efficient, but they fixed it. So there's lots of water being lost that we could stop from leaking, and then deal with our mains program, however it's done. Now, Mr. President, I want to speak a bit about what is happening, sir, with our population and our plans for population increase and tourism and healthcare. All of these areas, sir, demand tremendous amounts of water. And I believe, and I might be wrong, that in the tourism sector, water use is not the most efficient. I will not comment, sir, on whether the users of the water pay for it or not. But I believe the government needs to collect all its revenue. And if I pay mine, all those who use should pay theirs. Enough said. Sir, the quality of our water, despite the issues we have with volume and supplies, is a good quality, it's tested. And the fact that vessels that come into our ports will take our water on board in huge quantities is probably a testament to the quality of our water. I've often wondered what happens to all the money that is collected for the water sold to these vessels, and this agency receives it. Maybe someone, sir, can clarify that for me. Sir, Senator Brathwaite, I believe it was Senator Brathwaite, who spoke of rainfall. And we normally, I was taught when I was at school, sir, in your time, get about 62 plus inches of rainfall a year. And the current records this year show it down to about 42%. 42 inches per year. It means that we are really in a continuous drought. We're not out of the drought. This document, sir, that I referred to, this wonderful document, I think I can call it a wonderful document, spoke, sir, of our water reserves based on the rainfall at 60 inches and our rainfall at 40 inches. If you've reached 40 inches per year, and we have had far more increases in our demand than in 1946, it tells us that we have a big, big problem, sir. And it means, therefore, that we have to conserve water. And I've heard briefly on the radio bashing of various persons, sir, for the comments. But I believe, sir, the time has come for a serious, and it's probably not too late, public education campaign, not on brass tacks. Not, sir, on brass tacks, but a proper public education campaign, sir, about water conservation, water reuse, and what it really means. I think, sir, that it is not what you say, but how you say it, sir. Mr. President, we accept that even in the time when this document was published in 1946, there was serious concern by the author that suck wells and such like might contaminate the water supply. But he had to admit that he saw no evidence that it was doing it, that the coral rock layer appeared to filter out contaminants. I can't comment on whether it's true or not at present, but we need to change how we deal with our sewage and our houses that's not connected to a sewage system, sir. Is an urgent one. And I'm pleased that the government has given notice. It has given notice that septic tanks that have been enforced for a long time on houses of a certain style and size will now, in the future, become mandatory. And hopefully be retrofitted also, sir. Going forward, it should mean, sir, that what we put into the ground should be as good as what the water reuse program will be putting back in. Because currently what we put into the ground directly from our homes is pure, unadulterated sewage. And what the water reuse program suggests is that you will have treatment to, I think it's level 3, tertiary treatment, which is as good as you want to use for agriculture and for recharging the aquifer. I hope that no one will misquote me. Now, Mr. President, on a matter of water rights, I was told by someone that there's something called an undeclared subsidy. That you can have a subsidy that nobody has written down as a subsidy. But if two persons are competing in the same marketplace and one gets an input for free and one gets it and have to pay for it, then one is getting an undeclared subsidy. I don't know how to reflect that on in accounting terms, sir, but it's an undeclared subsidy. I'm pleased that the government, with the new Water and Well Management Committee will be regulating water wells and will be doing many things that needed to be done for a long time with regard to abstraction. And I have read 2 local opinions on water rights. I don't know if other people have read them. I suppose they might have. And if the government in a drought cannot regulate the amount of water that is being abstracted from private wells, then it means we don't have control of what they give to our people. So I think this legislation, sir, has been long in coming and it's necessary, and I'm pleased to say that it's about to happen. Now, there was a number mentioned by Dr. Chantal Monroe Knight about the number of active water wells in Barbados. And I do not know how accurate those figures are. But what is frightening, sir, and shocking, is that in this 1946 document, the author recorded 785 wells. 785 wells. And he declared that 583 were active. If we now only have a list that contains less than 100, we have to ask what has happened to the other wells, because you can't move wells. You can't take one to St. Lucia or someplace else. So the well, once you take a well, it's a well. Unless you can plug it or somehow cap it and stop you from getting access to it, it is there. Sir, as a boy, I grew up in Christchurch, and there were lots of windmills. I've not seen one in Christchurch in a long time. Those areas have been replaced by developments. So I've asked, why would someone buy a lot of land, have a well already there, and dig a new one? I could only imagine what is going into those wells. This document, sir, which I understand in some places is called a secret document, but I've made it public, so it's not secret anymore. This document, sir, lists every well that existed in 1946 in Barbados. It lists them by parish, by location, by plantation name. It lists, sir, the height above sea level, the depth of the well, the number of feet of water in the well, and whether the well was being pumped by a mechanical device or not. There is a map, sir, as an appendix that shows where all of the wells are. What we need to do, sir, is use a document to find the wells. If we have development, sir, going on, and people are still putting sewage directly into the wells, we are fighting a lost cause. You are contaminating it, and then you have to pay to clean it. Makes no sense. Now, Mr. President, I suspect I'm coming close to the end of my allowed time. There's an important link, Mr. President, in our situation between water and energy. We happen to have, sir, the Minister of Energy as a leader of government business. If 75% of the cost of water production is really the cost of the energy input, It means we have to find ways, sir, of lowering the cost of the energy input. It means, sir, that when we enter for the BWA's own production, it should probably look to green energy, where the sunlight is free. But yes, investment is required. But, sir, it also means that when governments, and I'm not speaking, sir, about this administration in particular, when governments enter agreements with private entities to supply water, the energy consideration and the cost of it, which you said, has to be at the top of the table, sir. Otherwise, sir, water will become unaffordable. And everyone in this country, from the richest persons to the persons who have the least, sir, it's important, and they have to have it. I'm told that in this country, there's approximately $9 billion sitting in the banks. I'm a doctor, sir, I'm not an economist. The people of this country will not abandon it. They don't plan to leave. I certainly don't plan to leave. And if there's an opportunity, sir, to invest in water, and I had available funds, sir, I would invest in it. So was Senator Thompson, I'm sure.
I don't have available funds, but I'm looking for some place to put
Yes.
yours.
Sir, is the best plan for the future. Your great-grandchildren, sir, will benefit from what is called intergenerational wealth. We all need water. Maybe some brilliant person will come with a plan where we can have whatever you call it, the necessary funding done so that the public can invest in water. The public who use it every week, every day, every month, when you get your bill, you will also be saying, cha-ching, I've made some money. It is not a brilliant idea. It is quite simple. We, Mr. President, need to own the water in this country. We collectively, the people. Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Mr. Senator Dr. Rogers.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to speak for a few minutes on this amendment. Conscious of the fifth mark of mission of my church, to safeguard the integrity of creation and to renew life on earth. It is one of the things about which we're passionate in our care for the environment, our care for creation. And I dare say that this particular amendment before us is of extreme importance at this time. It's extreme importance, not simply because I'm saying that, but just look at what has been reflected on within this year. The world is recognizing how critical the availability of water is to human existence. On March 22nd, we observed World Water Day under the theme Accelerate Change. And what they're talking about at that point in time is focusing on the Sustainable Development Goal 6, in which we are hoping that by 2030, we can have clean water and good sanitation available to people in this world. But we did not stop there. On October 16th, we observed World Food Day. You know what the theme for World Food Day was, sir? Water is life. Water is food. Leave no one behind. And why are we reflecting upon this? In the wilderness guides, when people are going out hiking and so on, they're given a particular guide. And in that guide, there's something called the rule of 3. You can last 3 weeks without food. Well, you need oxygen. You'll only last 3 minutes. But without water, 3 days. It is that critical. As human beings, for males, 60% of our body is water. 55% of females, sorry. It is said that females have a little more fatty tissue, and therefore fat does not absorb water as readily. No, this is science. We are 60% water, sir, as males, 55 as females. And that tells us how critical this commodity is to us. As I speak to you, sir, 1.4 billion people will die this year. Million people will die this year. And 74 million will have their lives shortened from diseases relating to poor water. It's just this year. That's according to the World Health Organization in 2022. 1 in 4 people in our world, 2 billion people, lack safe drinking water. It's according to the World Health Organization and UNICEF in 2021. Almost half the population of the world, 3.6 billion people, lack safe sanitation. Mr. President, to that end, I wish to commend us for at least bringing these amendments here. But in doing that, I wish to go back to 1963, as Senator Dr. Monroe Knight would have mentioned, and thank the pioneers then. Because if we have been operating on studies that were done in 1963, those people were at the top of their game. I want to thank them for what they've done. I want to commend the Barbados Water Authority, all who have worked there throughout the years, for keeping us safe. Barbados still has one of the best, I believe, water supplies in the world in terms of its quality. As Dr. Maynard would have pointed out just now, the cruise ships still take our water. And so as we reflect upon this, I want us to really put our hearts and minds into what is taking place here, and recognize that this legislative change is not all that is necessary to bring about the transformation that we need to see. The institutional strengthening is important, and I welcome that. But there's something we must also recognize as a public. The delivery of water in this country must be heavily subsidized. We are not really paying what we ought to for the water that we receive. I just want us to be aware of that. When we complain and all the other things, just remember that this is heavily subsidized. But I'll also hope that the institutional strengthening will deal with some of the issues that Dr. Maynard spoke to. It's painful to see water just running on the road. Burst means sometimes it's visible that there's a burst there. Sometimes you call and no one comes. Some will say perhaps only on the weekend. I don't know why. I didn't say that, sir. But there needs to be a speedier response to breaches in the system so that we can preserve this precious commodity in what has already been described as a water-scarce country. I am happy to hear of the establishment of the water protection zones and bringing them into legislation. I just hope that that also means that political expediency will go through the window when persons are squatting in places that are designated water zones. particularly the zone A areas where we're told that it just takes 90 days for the water to get through the system. I think we have to be serious as a country. Yes, we want to make sure that everyone can have an adequate space and adequate housing, but we also have to protect each other. And such things cannot be laid on the altar of political expediency just to secure another 5 years, which I've already spoken to in other places. I'm also happy to hear of these water protection zones that will be properly designated as well, because we want to make sure that land use does not change based on who is making the application. I've just heard these things happen. If this is something that we recognize, as I've pointed out all the statistics, is important for the survival of our people, we must put everything in place to ensure that our groundwater system is protected and preserved. And so I wish to commend the government for bringing these amendments, but I want to implore us as Barbadians to recognize that this is just legislation. We all have to look after the precious resource that we have. We have to conserve, we have to store, we have to harvest. You know, I was born in a country, sir, where in order to build a house, you have to build a cistern. In St. Martin, you do not get water that readily. And so you have to go and dip your water out of the cistern with your bucket if you didn't have a pump, and all those things. Right? We're not there. But I believe that we can, all of us, can seek to harvest water and use it for some of the things we have to do around the yard. We already know that. We've been told, wash your cars, do all those things, collect rainwater, do things. So that the 10% that we currently harvest, as Senator Dr. Brathwaite spoke to, can become a larger percentage, but it'll be used within our domestic sphere and ease the burden on the system. And with those few words, sir, I wish to once again pledge my full support for this amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers. Senator Dr. Hines.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Thank you for acknowledging me. So we're talking about water today. And it is important for us to note, and I think this has been indicated in here already, that access to safe water, to sanitation, these are very important things. Indeed, these have been noted as human rights. So things to which we are all entitled by the very nature of our humanity. And it is really unfortunate at this time that we see people who are being denied water access to for political reasons, in particular with the turmoil that we are seeing in the Middle East. And you know, this is an issue around the world with access to water. So in Barbados, we are very fortunate that we do indeed have access to safe water, and that we do have the requisite facilities that allow us to have the level of sanitation required in this country. I would like to refer specifically to some words offered by the Deputy Prime Minister, the Honourable Minister Bradshaw, on the 22nd of March 2023, in which she indicated some of the things we've been discussing here already. And this is in her statement to the United Nations Midterm Comprehensive Review on the Implementation of the Objectives of the International Decade for Action, Water for Sustainable Development, which is 2018 to 2023, that's a decade. 2028, sorry, that's a decade. This is on March 22nd, 2023, World Water Day. And in what I saw from the statement, the Deputy Prime Minister indicated, as we have mentioned in here already, that Barbados is a water scarce country, that per capita water availability in Barbados is of 306 cubic meters per capita, and that's per year. Approximately 80% of the water supply in Barbados comes from low-lying coastal aquifers, and this has some implications for things such as increasing salinity that can occur with sea level rise, which in itself can be a problem if we are considering longer-term availability of safe water. She went on to note that despite this, we have 99% coverage, and that coverage of access to safe water in Barbados, and that our water supply meets the WHO, World Health Organization's guidelines. So we have safe water, and people can access it despite the issues we face related to climate change, scarcity, and all the rest that we have already heard about today. Barbados has scored over 99% with regards to the Sustainable Development Goal number 6, 6.11, and 6.21, and these refer to access to safe drinking water and access to sanitation and hygiene, and as well as wastewater management. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister also noted these, and these are things that are commendable for Barbados. Therefore, it is clear that ensuring that we continue to manage our water resources is very important as a human rights issue, a health issue, and a development concern. All of these can be connected. But the Barbados Water Authority, and this legislation actually has the Barbados Water Authority in the title. The Barbados Water Authority certainly has done commendable work for this country, no doubt about it, and this information that I provided already indicates the stellar work of the Barbados Water Authority. But I cannot help but reiterate, or repeat, I should say, some of the concerns that I hear quite often about our water resources and how they are managed, and perhaps sometimes not appropriately managed. So I am able to hear quite a lot of complaints, although not working for an official complaints agency. But I do get via telephone and WhatsApp a number of complaints, even though I would love for people to talk about other things. And these complaints have to do with burst pipes, water running in the street for weeks. Sometimes I hear months, sometimes I hear people talking about moss built up outside of their house. And for a country that is water scarce, this really is a problem, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And I note that Senator Dr. Monroe Knight has indicated that there will be some right sizing of the Barbados Water Authority, and this should provide for greater efficiencies. And one hopes that this includes addressing some of these really important issues that affect people. People are very concerned when they see water wasting, just running in the streets for weeks, sometimes for months, they assert. This is something that needs to be rectified urgently. We continue to hear complaints about people whose water does not look like something they would like to drink unless their pipes are serving Mobby. The water is brown. And we know that these are issues that are being addressed, that there is work being done on mains replacement in Barbados, but these continue to be very important concerns that people have and need to be addressed. I note in listening to the debate in the other place that the Barbados Water Authority received a loan in the amount of $71 million from the Caribbean Development Bank in 2016. And it still requires a further $30 million annually from government in addition. I hope, and this legislation is not telling me how this is going to occur, how the right sizing is going to occur, and how these efficiencies are going to occur. But these things are really critical to address. How is it that the Barbados Water Authority is going to become more efficient in terms of managing this scarce and precious resource? And how is it going to become more efficient through this right sizing, or whatever it is, so that it is on a better financial footing, let's put it that way. This is important. It's important. We know that we probably don't pay the amount that we should pay for access to water. So what is it that we're going to do in order to make sure that the Barbados Water Authority can do all of these really important things that we need it to do for our safety, for development, for human rights of the people of Barbados? I would love to hear more about this. There's something I would like to say, and I will not be very long today because I'm not an expert in this area, and I certainly am not going to try to pretend to be one. I learned a lot, despite brass tacks not being an official educational forum, but this Monday I did hear some persons who are experts speaking about this issue, because I've heard a lot of concern. People think that we are drinking toilet water. This is very concerning. This seems to be some kind of view that is running wild in some parts of Barbados based on discussions about having tertiary treatment. People do not understand what this means. Where is this water going? Are we drinking it? Have we been drinking it? People are very concerned about these things, and I was very pleased to hear some of this information being offered to the public. I was also pleased that questions were being answered. I think I can agree with Senator Maynard that much more has to be done because of how important water is to all of us. People want to feel a sense of safety as well. They want to feel that this new zoning, this A to F, is not some kind of ruse. They want to feel that this is not some kind of effort to allow certain types of developments to happen in areas that were previously designated as Zone 1. So they want to not just hear that the old evidence was from 1963 and we have current evidence. I believe people would require and do require more information and more frequent access to this information so that they are not skeptical about the motivations for this rezoning. In particular, these changes to what was, or perhaps still is to this day, Zone 1, what will be Zone A. It's shrinking. People want to understand this and to be assured that it is not going to jeopardize the quality of water. So these kinds of initiatives to inform the public, to allow them to ask questions and have them answered, I would say in particular by experts rather than by political operatives, I think would be welcomed. And I say by experts because people do not want, we don't want there to be this skepticism that this is the agenda of the government. The government which is populated by a particular political party and may have certain sub-agendas, if you will, attached. So I think this is very important, and Senator Dr. Monroe Knight notes that this zoning will now be supported by legislation, which can potentially be useful. I have to say, though, that in trying to understand, yes, I listened to some things. As I said, I listened to the radio, and that information was very helpful. I also tried to do some research on my own, and of course, because we are amending legislation, I sought to read the legislation. And I say I sought to read the legislation because it was very difficult for me to understand this amendment in context. And I say this because it is hard to find the principal legislation. It is not straightforward to find it. We have access to a database, as members of this honorable chamber to legislation. We have access to legislation, but when I look at the legislation that this is amending, it doesn't include all the amendments so that I'm able to understand this in the context of the Principal Act. This is problematic. It's problematic for us in here as legislators because our role is not to object to things, not to be difficult or to be troublemakers, but to understand and, if possible, provide some checks, to provide comment, to provide suggestion. How is it that we are going to do that if we cannot even see the principal legislation? So I was able, thankfully, with assistance, to at least find the different amendments and then work out some kind of collage of my own to see what I believe is in the principal legislation. But this is really problematic for us if we are going to make suggestions and look at this very important legislation. This legislation is important and we should be able to understand it properly. Furthermore, I would suggest that those people who are in the public that want to understand the legislation and want to go beyond what they hear from this honorable chamber and the other place should be able to do so as well. And how can they do that when the legislation is in this state? All right. So I just say that because I think it is important to say, even though it does not necessarily affect the substance of this amendment. The Barbados Water Authority Amendment Bill. And just before closing off on this particular matter, it is important because there is also some discussion that I heard about a piece of legislation that we previously debated in here that then via the radio, social media, and other places, it came to people's attention that there was some kind of error in it, and this was admitted, and there were questions raised about how come the senators, when they looked at this, could not flag this error. And I want to suggest that part of the reason that it may be difficult to highlight errors is because we cannot see the legislation properly. We are looking at pieces of legislation. We may perhaps be looking at an old document and thinking that this is the Principal Act when it is not. So I was looking at what I could find as a Principal Act, and this amendment was telling me that it is amending 5.1, and that one did not have any 5.1, which signaled to me that I was looking at the wrong thing. This should not be some kind of obstacle course in legislation. Anyway, there is one particular thing in here that I would like to raise though, and this pertains to the regulations. And we know that regulations are important. Regulations are where we actually understand better some elements of the legislation, how it is given life in some ways. And one of the amendments here actually removes this. It is 28(5) that says regulations made under this section are subject to negative resolution. What does this mean? If a regulation is subject to negative resolution, that means it has to come back. The regulations have to come in here. We at least have to be notified of changes to the regulations, if my understanding is correct. So removing that really places a bit more power in the hands of the minister to affect changes to regulations, which may not necessarily be a problem for efficiency's sake, because this removes this additional step that you may need to take, which can be a good thing. It can expedite processes. However, it does then omit, it gets rid of our ability to provide some kind of check, some oversight. Thank you for the word, Senator Drake. So, Mr. President, this is basically what I have to say on this amendment. I certainly I will be looking forward to more public information on things such as the zoning. I want to repeat that I think this is critical, and also more public information on what things such as secondary treatment and tertiary treatment mean, what they mean for the continued safety of our water supply, as this, as I mentioned before, is a precious resource to which we all have rights. Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Hines. Senator Hibbert.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for permitting me this morning. Mr. President, I believe the previous contribution, I must do it a service by also making a contribution and quoting from an event, the United Nations Water Conference in New York in March 2023. I believe we had the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Santia Bradshaw, who represented the work program of the government with regards to integrated water resource management. And I quote, sir, that she said, amongst other things, that the government has augmented its water supply through brackish and seawater desalination, implemented a strategic mains replacement program to repair and rehabilitate the aging infrastructure, planned updates of 2 municipal wastewater treatment plants, and rehabilitated water supply reservoirs and pumping station buildings to withstand at least Category 3 hurricanes, sir. And I want to begin, sir, to reflect the fact that these amendments coming before us today are only the substantive aspects of precursor initiatives that this government has taken to ensure the sustainability of our integrated water resource management plan, sir. But, sir, if you permit me to get into the meat of the matter today, which I shall do, I really want to say that the bill is one in a series of important steps that the country has to take in order to fully realize the potential of its water resource management. And the government fully recognizes the dire constraints as has been reflected in the contributions before me, sir. And like none other, we do understand the effects of climate change, which has implications on our water resources. The bill focuses largely on governance enhancements in an institution that we are all familiar with, an institution, Mr. President, that I would say is aptly outfitted with highly skilled technicians who all understand the importance of maintaining the water network across Barbados. I go the extra mile to say it is aptly outfitted, not necessarily in terms of quantities, because you can always deal with more workers, but those that are there, I believe that they're committed to what they're doing on a daily basis. Sir, we have also recognized that the bill focuses on strengthening not only institutional capacity, but operational capacity as far as the water zones are concerned. The one amendment from GM to CEO, I believe that this is a recognition of the fact that the internal and external environment being faced by the Barbados Water Authority, demands that the BWA, demands that are being made of the BWA today are not the same that were made 2 decades ago, sir. And these are demands that cannot be solved by the likes of ChatGPT. These are demands that really require, sir, some intricate technical expertise with regards to how we tackle our integrated water resource management system. The institution is now constantly embarking on initiatives at a scale never seen before in our history, and with other organizations who otherwise would not have taken interest in Barbados or the Barbados Water Authority a decade and some ago. As a result, sir, we're able to access tens of millions of dollars, as Senator Monroe Knight mentioned, from the Green Climate Fund in grant funding. And this is intended, sir, to improve the water network and includes components of renewable energy, to which the government has laid respectfully a cutout for the Barbados Water Authority in terms of energy generation into the grid as well. More importantly, sir, these changes reflect a need for the policy of the government to be more closely aligned to the operations of the organization. And as has been mentioned as well, the burden that fell on the general manager and that falls on the general manager, and I'm speaking, sir, as a person who has been involved in many aspects of engagement with BWA, the burden is heavy, sir. It is extensive. There's so many projects that are being chased by too few human resources within the BWA. And the buck stops perhaps at the GM, and it is a lot, sir. The fundamental issues of the Barbados Water Authority are the same perhaps from 2 decades ago, but the scale is incomparable to any time period before. And the institution faces a number of conundrums to which solutions can be explored given the institutional arrangements. As we know, sir, in terms of integrated water resource management, there are a number of areas that the BWA will seek to tackle. It will be water scarcity, water conservation, as Senator Bradford has spoken about, water harvesting, and also distribution, and the list goes on and on and on. But sir, over the last few days, we have borne witness to the devastating blessings, if we can call it that, of the excessive water across the country. Almost everyone in every parish has a story to tell about the impact, sir, as they usually do, and as they have a right to do. Closer to home, sir, I want to take us to an area called Goodland Gardens in Christchurch, which has been highlighted not only in 2023, but in 2013 and 1993, and perhaps 1983, before I was born, where multiple entries and multiple spots in that community were flooded. Now, those like myself who have a historical connection to the area can tell you that despite the name being Goodland, potential house owners should exercise their full autonomy in researching the lots on which they build in as much detail as possible, and speaking to some of the neighbors in the area as well, sir. Much of this area used to be a pond, sir, and I used to run around in the pond many times as well. And despite the enjoyable times of stopping and picking dunks on my way down to Miami, which is not necessarily possible today given the level of construction that's taken place, the area really and truthfully requires some intervention. And I saw the Minister of Home Affairs was in the area very early after the flooding, himself and others from his team, so I really want to commend him for that. And sir, this is not a reflection of condemnation whatsoever on homeowners, yeah? Let me put that there. It is a reflection of the times and the reality that we face not only in Goodland Gardens, but across Barbados as well, and further underscores the need to advance the operational and institutional development of this, our prized institution, the Barbados Water Authority. Now, Senator Bradford has often made mention of the need to harvest water, and in denial, quite understandably, that we are a water-scarce country. Now, my concern, sir, really and truthfully, is that we must truly understand what we have in our subterranean spaces in terms of the aquifers. So, whereas, sir, it is a natural inclination for us to capture water and continuously capture water, our subterranean infrastructure in terms of the aquifers acts in a similar way to how a kidney performs in the body, sir, to get rid of a lot of waste. And one of the things that comes to mind is the level of saltwater intrusion. As sea levels continue to rise, you will find that particularly around the shoreline, sir, the saltwater intrusion will become more and more pervasive. And what does that mean, Senator? What does that mean, Mr. President, sir? It means that Senator Bradford might be a bit more annoyed to know that if we capture all of the water, worst case scenario, wholesale harvesting, that you are issuing a death sentence to the agricultural sector because you're not allowing the aquifers to naturally repel the level of salt water coming into the country as well, sir. So whereas we have an interest in harvesting water, the aquifers have a role to play. And they also carry useful bacteria, sir. They also carry useful components that may be consumable to humans as well, sir.
Senator Herod, just on behalf of Senator Bradford, who's chosen up to defend himself, I think the point made by Senator Bradford related to rainfall as opposed to the aquifer. And he was suggesting that we needed to capture as in make use of rainfall rather than runoff.
Correct.
Rather than
Correct.
runoff, but not in relation to extracting more from the aquifer. Because they know that would not be a point that he would make. So I just wanted to ask you to
Thank you, Mr.
revise
President.
that.
Sir, thank you very much, Mr. President. We're clearly learning because that was actually the next point I was going to make. So I really appreciate the interjection, sir. But let me be clear. Government must, and I know that they will, do something about this long-standing issue of flooding, flood engineering and flood mitigation with both gray and green solutions. Gray solutions meaning physical infrastructure like concrete, holding stations and stuff. Green solutions, more environmentally inclined to ecosystem-based adaptation as well. And sir, I want to also commend again the Minister of Home Affairs for being in the area very rapidly and also highlighting some things that we never really noticed by passing the area. If you had to look into the guttering in Goodland, sir, it was filled with bottles up to the brim, up to the brim. And whereas this may not be the only level of intrusion that causes the flooding, it is a severe contributor as well, sir. But we all know, if we had to look at the elevation maps, like looking to the north in terms of Gibbons, to the east, Sirius Core, then you have Careless Gap to the west as well, sir. If you look at the elevation map, Goodland looks like a pond, basically a place to settle water as well, sir. But the government is not putting its foot down and saying that it will do nothing. In fact, they're looking at doing some serious flood engineering services there as well, sir. So I will not belabor this particular contribution because I believe it has been well represented on both sides. And I also know, sir, that the Honourable Prime Minister has an interest in terms of anything to do with water conservation in BWA. She, better than anyone else, can speak for herself, sir, and articulate the issues I touched on. But I must say that based on our interactions a few weeks ago in Grenada, that she is willing to support any water conservation initiative, in my opinion, so long as it has a component that speaks to addressing the vulnerable, sir. Those who cannot afford to reinforce themselves in terms of capturing water. And that is why the personal tank program at the Barbados Water Authority is so important. I must commend the Barbados Water Authority for all the work that they've done through the GCF, and now they have the vulnerability protocols established to determine who are best fit in terms of accessing the water tanks as well, sir. And I believe in the same light, sir, that we have made the solar panels a right of access across Barbados. I believe that the auxiliary storage for water must be a right across Barbados as well. But with right, sir, comes responsibility. And this is where the conservation of this natural resource really comes into full effect. A few comments were made before, and I suspect, obviously, if you're not necessarily privy to conversations before they come to public through the right channel, sir, you would think that they don't exist. But I can tell you, without fear of any backlash, that up to yesterday, the Barbados Water Authority was in serious programming for a number of hours to identify how best to communicate its conservation program across the country. I can say, sir, that the Barbados Water Authority is giving consideration to going beyond the meter. And traditionally, we know that from the house to the meter, liability falls at the owner, that's what we say. But the Barbados Water Authority recognizes, based on my observation, they recognize that they can't just stand back and allow persons who cannot provide for themselves to allow leaks to occur at their houses. And so, sir, they may be considering looking at how best to create a framework and an intervention for that. And within that intervention, sir, are also the customer service infrastructure. I heard mention was made of not replying in time and stuff as well. But I believe, based on what I've seen, and it will be communicated through the correct channels, that these concerns are noted, these concerns will be addressed, and will be communicated to the public in short order as well, sir. Sir, I also wanted to clear the air in terms of the subsidies. There was mention made about subsidies and the lack of subsidies for the sector. And I must remind honourable members through you, sir, that even though the water that we get from the taps, based on the cost to produce them, is subsidized, particularly the comment was made against the agricultural sector, where the commercial rates have not changed at the Barbados Water Authority from $4 and some per cubic square meter to $7, up to $7, I believe. That the rates that are given to the agricultural sector and the farmers, sir, the rate is actually $1.80. So I want to say that we do have a subsidization program in place through the Barbados Water Authority, whether it be the BADMC or the Barbados Water Authority that is shouldering the burden of the subsidy. There is a subsidy, sir. I believe that would have been communicated sometime last year in the other place as well, sir. So, sir, with these few words, I would want to once again commend the government for taking these steps. Taking these steps. And usually when you say, with these few words, you think that you're wrapping up. I'm wrapping up yet. Sir, I just want to talk on the water zone, and this is my very last point. The water zone allocation that was very well articulated in here. Let me cut a long story short. If these zones are not put in place as they are presented, Barbadians will have to pay more at the pump for water. Because of our process that we currently have in terms of treating water, yes, it may be adequate in terms of the level of contaminants and stuff that are into the system. But if we leave it as Senator Drakes would say, ceteris paribus, all things being constant, sir, it means that we will have an increased level of contaminants, and it means that the level of technology, the type of technology that we're using, will not be the normal technology we're using. We may have to go to infrared technology. We may have to add additional filters at the treatment plants as well, and that cost would have to be borne someplace, sir. So I believe that the Barbados Water Authority, through the government, is making the right decision to ensure that we take the bull by the horns, as some persons say, and really deal with the water zone issue to limit the level of contamination, to limit the level of technology uptake, and to limit the burden being carried all across Barbados and Barbadians, sir. So with those few words again, sir, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Hayward. Her Honor, Senator Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just really want to pick up on a few of the comments that were made during the course of the morning as the debate covered a number of issues. I think that it is important to note, and I begin on this point, that the changes being made are of three broad types. To use the science available today that was not available in the 1950s and the 1960s when the system of zoning was established, to protect Barbadians, to secure our water resources, and to ensure the continuation of sustainable development on the basis of being able to efficiently and effectively manage our water resources and to protect the wider public. Really, that is the basis of the amendment to the legislation and what we are attempting to do today. And in addition to that, cognizant that significant changes have taken place in the complexity and the management of the water resources and the institution responsible for the administration of the system. The bill also seeks to make some amendments or changes to the way that the BWA is managed, led, and structured. I would have liked to see, just by way of observation, on the Wells Management Committee, a member of the Barbados Association of Engineers. I don't remember what they call themselves, but I think that an external individual, not just made up of civil service and civil service representatives who could have brought some kind of different oversight or different opinion to this internal perspective that you would have seen from the civil service team, would have been an important and desirable addition. In addition to that, my concern about that particular committee is that essentially, whenever there is to be review of development planning, proposals being made by government, etc., you constitute the same, I don't want to say the usual suspects, but you constitute the same technical support people, and very often you don't get the full input because they're not necessarily meeting, they're so busy, etc. So I would have liked to see a different sort of structure or structure that allowed for the transparency of an external individual, professional, trained technically, and the public, in my view, would have had a bit greater confidence when you could say, but X sits on the board, or the Barbados Association of Engineers is also on that committee. So if we are talking about management structure, I make that by way of observation, and I know that there are people who would have said, so why you didn't say it to the BLP before? And it is because very often now, when the parliamentary group meets, I'm in meetings of the Parliamentary Reform Commission, which also meets on Monday evenings, so I don't have the opportunity, and I apologize, and I'm sure it is something that would have been taken on board, but it is not too late to give it consideration. I don't mean today, I mean in the overall structure, and to consider it. Why is it important for us to address these water resources? It is important because we are a tiny, finite landmass, subject now to shrinking water resources, frequent droughts, the impacts of climate change and the worst consequences thereof, and the fact that still, as a tourism-driven economy, we are a population of 270,000 people who entertain or host 1 million people per year. In addition, our development profile is showing an increasing number of large commercial developments, growing residential developments, people moving out of home earlier and earlier, and with the policy stimulation being given for young people to get land tax release and have their own properties and so on, increasing numbers of young people are looking to own their own homes or rent their own homes. We now have multi-residence homes taking place, much more so before than single homes, so that the demand for water, and as the society becomes more sophisticated, the demand for water increases exponentially. And this is why, even though our water production or water resources are shrinking, the demand is increasing. So it is important that we strategically get hold of the resources, identify, manage, protect, and secure, not just for now, but for our continuing development aspirations. Because a lot of the new hotels, the new developments that we are hearing about, are going to be dependent on having access to potable water. And we have to look at the technologies that are available to do so. So the Zone 1 system, or the zoning system, which we had previously, served us well, but we now have science which allows us to trace with a greater degree of certainty the travel time or the life cycle of bacteria in water, so we can protect and ensure that we are using good, available, current scientific knowledge to address that concern. Equally, I wanted to make the point that we have to consider, and I'm going to get back to that. I want to make the point, though, that if we are talking about wells, one of the things that I believe we have to pay greater attention to, and water resources generally, wells and water resources, is the amount of illegal dumping which takes place all across Barbados. 2 weeks ago, I went out to see Pico Tenerife from the land for the first time and hiked up a hill. There was nothing around except dumped old fridges, dumped galvanized. You even wondered how people got to this site. It took my old knees hell to get up the hills, past the sheep that were on the lower levels, to get close to the viewing point from Pico Tenerife. No, but indeed I was struggling up the hill, a friend and I, and we were talking about what it's like to get old and having these wonderful adventures in your old age. And when we got up there and felt that we would have the benefit of Pico Tenerife and then looking out, I think it is, to Archer's Bay or something in St. Lucie, there was all of this garbage just dumped. And I don't know how it would have got there, but it was substantial waste. We are at the point where in communities, where in the country, you see a lot of old vehicles leaking oil. People just dump car bodies. They dump all kinds of garbage. And there is no proper collection of it. There is certainly no monitoring of it. I live on the road to the Mangrove landfill. People dump illegally all along that road, even though the landfill is 200 yards on. All along that road. And these are areas which then leach into the groundwater trails, for want of a better word. It's not scientific, but I'm not a scientist. It leaches into whatever is in these containers, or the oils or whatever the garbage is as it breaks down, can contaminate the groundwater. So if we are talking about groundwater protection, we have not only to be conscious of who owns the abstraction wells, where they are, how they are using them, what they may be putting into them, but we have to be equally conscious of the fact that this nasty habit that Barbadians have developed of random illegal dumping from the carcasses of their dead dogs to their old bathtubs and fridges and stoves, to their old motor vehicles, has to be dealt with as a serious security and health risk for the population of Barbados. So speaking to zonal protection, that is certainly a point that I would want to make. I am pleased to see that there is a phase-in period for the shift to the new system of mandatory septic tanks, or within certain areas. And while it is to protect the water system, we have to allow a period for those who currently live with suck wells to understand the rationale for why government is changing, so they do not see it as punitive or disadvantaging them, so that they cooperate with the new system, and so that we give to them such support as is necessary for them to make the transition. There may have to be the establishment of some kind of fund for persons who do not immediately have the resources to install septic tank systems and so on, for them to address it. But this is another area, and I caution, because it is important to let the public know that this is not something that is going to become an immediate albatross to them next week. Because even though the changes in the NIS system do not take place for virtually another decade, those who oppose the government have represented it as an almost immediate change that is going to disadvantage people who are retiring this year and next year. I mean, even yesterday, or we saw this morning, a man in the newspaper complaining that his pension keeps getting shifted, for those who read that very humorous story. It was hilarious for those who read it. For those who haven't read it, you need to go read it. It was really very good. There are a couple other points that I want to make. I want to take this opportunity really also, I think it's important to congratulate the BWA on the work that is being done. A few years ago, certainly in 2018, when we came to office, all across Barbados, St. John, St. Joseph, parts of St. Peter, parts of St. Thomas, the water outages were frequent. People weren't having access to potable water, St. John as well. And those complaints are becoming less and less because of the mains replacement system, because of ensuring that water is carried to the communities, particularly rural communities, so that they do not feel like second-class citizens. New reservoirs are under construction. Reservoirs are being rehabilitated, cleaned, and fixed up and made more efficient and better functioning. This is the kind of maintenance work that redounds to the benefit of the country, and that when BWA performs poorly, we must be critical of them, but when they do their work and do it well, equally we must give them the applause that is due. 30 kilometers, as I understand it, of age main replacements has or is in the process of taking place, and the rehabilitation of reservoirs and tanks so as to build capacity and resilience, which is extremely important. We saw that during, what was the name of the little hurricane we had? Elsa. Yeah, we saw that during Elsa, how we thought, you know, that we were so well protected in some instances, but more and more we are becoming conscious of how vulnerable we are, just like many of our brothers and sisters in the Eastern Caribbean, and the potential risks of that vulnerability. So this is not a static system. The system needs constant management, constant monitoring, and constant improvement to keep up to date with the demands of the the legitimate demands of the population, and our needs as a society that is developing at what is not a slow rate, particularly having regard to the setbacks that we had in the last decade, and the problem of COVID, and the most recent challenges that we have with wars, rumors of wars, and saber rattling that have interrupted supply chains, as well as affected us, driving inflation, negatively driving inflation in a very real way. There is therefore, before I sit, two more points that I would wish to make very briefly. The first is this. I am becoming more and more conscious that we do not take issues of security in Barbados seriously. We have been extremely lucky that we have had no major negative incidents which have caused harm to our population and to certain sectors of the population. But we ought to be conscious that terrorism is a very real risk the world over, and that the Caribbean could be perceived as a soft target. It is therefore critical, in my view, that we start to protect seriously both our electrical power installations and our water installations. Mr. President, you know I like an anecdote, so I will share one with you. Many years ago, long before I was married, sir, a young man and I went walking on the beach one night. And we were merely walking, sir. It was a nice night. The moon was high, and he was whispering sweet nothings. We came to a point, sir, where it is relevant. You will see the relevance, sir. We came to a point, sir, where there was some construction material located, and a shed which we thought had construction material which should have been protected, perhaps cement bags and so on. So we sat, not close to each other, sir, I'm happy to say. We sat and we were talking and laughing. We sat outside the shed, sir, and we were talking and laughing. I must have laughed out particularly loud at something which clearly tickled my fancy. When the door of the shed was thrown open, sir, and a very tall man, you know I'm a short person, sir, stood up at the shed door in full pajamas and said, "We're gonna make less noise out there, we're gonna stopping me from sleeping." At which point we discovered that that was the security for the government materials, and he was the workman, and that all our laughing and making sport, thank God we hadn't been doing anything else, and that anyway, all our laughing and making sport had disturbed him from his slumber, and out he came to reprimand us. No. And the point of the story is, sir, that we don't take security seriously. And if you go around to various critical installations in Barbados, whether it is water or electricity, there is either a sleeping watchman, a missing watchman, a watchman who should be there but who breaking another job or who really home with his family, or no watchman at all. And in these days, we really have to either have cameras, monitoring, drones, and electronic monitoring at headquarters to protect the safety of our electrical supply and our water supply, because these can and will be targets at some point by nefarious persons. So while I introduced it, sir, with some degree of levity, I really do want to make the serious point that we have to treat, if we are talking now about automating our water system, moving the supply into the future, having these improved management systems and so on, that the issue of the security and the safety of the water supply and the electrical supply must fall within our cognizance and ambit as essential as part of the protective mechanisms that we are putting in place for the public. I close then, sir, on my final point, which is this. There was a point in our development when it was essential to secure our health as a population. That remains so. There was a point in our development when it was critical to secure our, did I say health just or education? Health or education, and that remains so. There was a point in our development when it was imperative to build out our physical infrastructure, telecommunications, bridges and drainage, airports and seaports, road infrastructure, because these were all critical to development. But the sustainable development and protection of the population, the security issues of the present and future are all going to be environmental, climate change, energy, water. And it is essential for us as a population not just to take these measures as we are doing today, but to truly understand the role that these significant environmental issues will have in our national development, in our sustainable development, in our quality of life, and to ensure that we don't join the growing number of environmental refugees that you are now seeing all over the world. Let us not forget that Barbuda, already the whole population had to be relocated as a result of a hurricane. And therefore, we cannot take these issues for granted and say, oh, well, that's just a water tank, pass me another glass there, give me some ice too. We really now have to think of these issues as security, as development, and as critical for the protection of life and our future generations. And with that, sir, I close my comments. Much obliged.
Thank you very much, Your Honor, Senator Thompson. Senator Dr. Moroni, please wrap up.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to thank all of the honorable senators that would have spoken this morning on this bill. I want to thank all of them that would have recognized as well the good work that is being done by the Barbados Water Authority. The Deputy President would have elaborated on some of those specifics, but I think that the comments this morning would suggest that there is a recognition that much is being done. There is a long road to go, but that work is being done to really address the mission critical challenges that are before us. I also want to thank those senators that would have spoken about the personal responsibility that citizens themselves must bear in this challenge. And that is a message that we must continue to echo to the society, that yes, we will have to make sure, as we're doing in the context of this amendment, to deal with the institutional issues, to make sure that we have the correct structures and processes in place, but that citizens must also take responsibility, somebody said ownership as well, and have a firm stake in making sure that we continue to have access to clean water. This is national, and national does not mean government. National means all of us. But I also take on board those comments as well that would suggest that the Barbados Water Authority and government has to do more in terms of public education and awareness and knowledge sharing, so that we can, yes, allay fears and respond to what people see as some of the critical deficiencies. So currently, the Barbados Water Authority has launched an education program within schools. There will be as well, under the Ministry of Environment, a larger public education program, and specifically when it comes to reclaimed water or reused water, there will be a specific education program that will be undertaken again to provide some level of comfort and awareness to the public in respect of what it is we mean when we talk about reclaimed water. Specifically, Mr. President, I want to allay the fears directly and to remind persons, particularly those that call in on the non-educational program, but we heard some of those reflections in the chamber this morning, that when we would have debated the Water Reuse Act, Mr. President, we were very clear to say that that act was not intended to introduce the use of reclaimed water for potable purposes. We were very clear. And perhaps, as was said, we need to further educate the population so they understand, so they're not drinking, as would have been suggested, rather toilet water. Mr. President, we would have indicated that reclaimed water, and I need to be able to say it for those that are listening, to be part of the educational trust. It is not for potable uses, it's not for people to drink, it is not even to be given to animals, Mr. President. It is to be used for flushing toilets, cleaning outdoor surfaces, watering or irrigating household gardens, green spaces, cleaning pans, and those sorts of things, but it is not to be used for human consumption by ourselves or by animals. But again, Mr. President, that is not a point of contention, but just to say that is the fact, but also to recognize and to agree that we need to do more in terms of doing the education and awareness. And the Barbados Water Authority is certainly aware of that, and that there are plans specifically to have a program that would address that. I also want, Mr. President, to speak to the issue that was raised by Senator Christopher Maynard in relation to the wells. Senator Maynard would have quoted from a study, I think it was 1947 study, which would have identified that there were a number of wells, and he would have asked the question in relation to the number that I would have quoted of 78 abstraction wells. Senator Maynard would have indicated that the study that he had in his possession would have noted that there were at that time over 580 or so, or about there, wells that were in operation. Therefore, he was asking, how could I be saying that at this point we only had 78 abstraction wells? Mr. President, please note that the 78 abstraction wells would have been in addition to the 580 that would have been quoted in that study. There are a number of different wells for different purposes, as I've been informed. There are suction wells, observation wells, wells that are for drainage as well. Abstraction wells are specifically used for pumping for use. So that is a separate category than the 580 that would have been quoted within that study that were, again, used for those different purposes. And as I would have indicated as well, so yes, we would have had 580, and yes, there would have been a map in there, but development has taken place. Some of those wells could have been carked, built over, etc. And that is why the Barbados Water Authority is once again going through a process of making sure that we can count and identify those other existing wells, Mr. President. So it was not a contradiction, but a recognition, and I would hope that it can be agreed that while that 1947 study is extremely important and set a good framework, that we would need again just to make sure that we can recount those wells, and that is what we are intending to do, and the Barbados Water Authority is doing so. Mr. President, I also want to respond to the question of how is the Barbados Water Authority going to right-size itself financially? So we know the institutional changes that have been identified within the amendment. And again, to also say, Mr. President, that again, this has to be a multifold strategy. So currently, the Barbados Water Authority is in the process of developing their strategic plan. And as part of that strategic plan, they're intending to set targets. And a part of that target has to do with, one, how they will do effective cost reduction internally. How will they look and be able to set a target that says, over the period of that strategic plan, and that process is ongoing, so I can't speak to those targets and numbers. You're currently in consultation with other partners in order now to be able to develop those very, very specific targets. But the intent is to look at different ways in order to do that right sizing, like I said, one of them being cost reduction. One of them as well is by creating efficiencies through some of those measures that we've spoken to, whether that's strategic mains replacement, response times, etc. So we lessen the times that crews have to go, improvement in customer service, and all of those things in order to make sure that, again, that we have those efficiency gains. But it is going to be something that is long-term. I am not, Mr. President, going to say that the BWA will be able to immediately right-size financially. And, we've spoken to the issue of the fact that the water, as was said by Senator Dr. John Rogers, is subsidized. And that is a big part of the challenge that we have. That balance that government has to have in terms of making sure that citizens have access to water. And again, that challenge in terms of what is the real cost of that provision. And that's a line, Mr. President, that we are going to have to continue to walk and to continue to balance. At the same time, the Barbados Water Authority, as I would have indicated, is going after grant funding, large portions of grant funding in order to be able to address some of those fundamental challenges that we've had. We've identified, Mr. President, that there are concerns. People are seeing water going down drains, rain is falling, we're having problems in terms of non-revenue water. And again, all of these issues are true and they are real, but at the same time, there are issues that the Barbados Water Authority is actively working on. In relation to non-revenue water and how we're going to improve that, the Barbados Water Authority has just received quite recently, I think it's about 114 or so district meters that are going to be installed across various districts. And what this will allow them to do is to be able to have a more accurate measure of where there is water loss, be able to better monitor what is happening within those districts as well. And when you add that to the strategic mains replacement program that is being implemented, that will allow us then to replace those leakages, and also, an enhanced response time to address those leakage as well, Mr. President, in order to deal with the non-revenue water. At the same time, the Barbados Water Authority will be undertaking a number of studies going forward that will allow them to have a more accurate picture of what is happening in relation to our underground water supplies and systems, and as well in terms of what is happening in relation to non-revenue water. Finally, Mr. President, I do want to say that I think, from a layman's perspective, when we see lots of rain falling, we always assume that that immediately means that there is more water, then we don't have a water problem. That is not the case, Mr. President. That is not the case. We lose, I am told, about 60% of the rainfall, again, just mainly due to evaporation. So really and truly, when you look at rain waterfall, you have a very small percentage of that can actually then go down to the aquifers and then be reused. So, and again, I think that is part of the education program that the Barbados Water Authority has to be able to undertake, to be able to educate persons as well in terms of exactly what it is when we're talking about water use, how we can actually store it, and what happens in terms of rainwater fall and how much actually we can use correctly. But I think, Mr. President, that we've all agreed that the amendments here are very critical, a very critical pillar. I think there's been enough said on the floor that we all understand that this will be a long-term process, again, of grappling with that mission critical issue, that the amendments are about one, in a set of actions that have been ongoing and also as well future actions that the government will put in place in order to be able to address the issues. With that, Mr. President, I beg that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg that Your Honour now leave the chair and the Senate dissolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
The Honourable the Senate is now in committee.
Deputy President, may we take the bills in groups? The clauses, that is.
Yes, of course.
Clauses 1 to 10.
Madam Deputy President, I beg that clauses 1 to 10 stand part.
The question is that clauses 1 through 10 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Clauses 11 to 20.
Madam Deputy President, I beg that clauses 11 to 20 do now stand part.
The question is that clauses 11 through 20 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Clauses 21 to 23.
Madam Deputy President, I beg that clauses 21 to 23 do now stand part.
The question is that clauses 21 through 23 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
The schedule. It is a schedule.
Madam Deputy President, I beg that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be now regarded as a schedule to the bill. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. And all honorable senators against please say no. The ayes have it.
Madam Deputy President, I beg that you do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Dr. Moronick.
Mr. President, I beg that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg that this bill be now passed and be cited as the Barbados Water Authority Amendment Act 2023.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Barbados Water Authority Amendment Act 2023. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Before I suspend the sitting of the House, of the Senate, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of two members of the Barbados Water Authority team who have been with us for the duration of this sitting. Mr. Christopher Mack, who is the Director of Finance and is Acting General Manager of the Barbados Water Authority, and Mr. Brian Stewart, Senior Engineer from the BWA. Thank you and to your leadership very much for ensuring that we have technical officials present in the chamber during the debate of substantial bills. Mr. President, with those few words, I'd like to move that this honorable chamber be suspended for lunch until 3 p.m. in the afternoon.
The question is that the Honourable Senate is suspended until 3 p.m. today. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The sitting therefore is suspended until 3 p.m. today.